Everyone knows furries are the best and most trustworthy pet owners, and few live up to that title better than the former TikToker Roman Hawke. In what seemed to be an extremely quickly developing drama, this furry, porn star, and so-called lizard expert has been embroiled in controversy regarding the death of his bearded dragon, as well as a very questionable subsequent GoFundMe.
The death of my literal daughter, my baby, my everything, warrants death threats for shit I didn't even do. I don't even know how to explain that, because that is the most brain-dead, demented shit I've ever heard.
Resulting in the complete wiping of his social media presence, encapsulating millions of followers. And as the smoke clears, people are wondering just what exactly happened and speculating on what his motivations were. Let's explore a little of Roman Hawke's past career, the very recent controversy, and just what was going on in this very sane individual's head. Just as a spoiler, well, none of them are good. Let's go. Roman Hawke recalls being raised in an environment of turmoil, with an absent father and abusive stepfather, leading him to eventually live with his grandmother. He claims to have had an interest in animals since he was young. In 2018, he was able to attend a reptile expo, and at 16 years old, bought the bearded dragon named Margo that would later become the center of his many controversies. It is also worth noting that he goes out of his way to emphasize how unprepared he was to take care of a bearded dragon at that time, and allowed the lizard to become obese, as well as raising it in unsanitary conditions.
I still didn't do my research. So young me was feeding her crickets whenever she's so pleased. I thought that they would stop eating when they're full. No.
He would occasionally post videos on TikTok, which he claims was mainly for fun, but that he had the hopes of gaining a following in the periphery. It was then that he made the infamous "Her name is Margo" TikTok as a parody of a different trend, and fair warning, it is powerful in nature.
Excuse me, her name is Margo. Now Margo or Mango was Fargo. Yeah, someone said Wells Fargo. Like, her name is Margo.
Holy God, what are you showing me? Come on!
This video went extremely viral, garnering tens of millions of views and a large amount of attention, as well as some ridicule. Hawke claimed that at the time, his grandmother oversaw his content, reflecting that it was an oppressive environment and that he felt exploited.
I have been put on this pedestal to create and put on a show and do marketing and do PR lists and do collabs while my grandmother was exploiting me.
Apparently, his grandmother didn't allow him to post anything vulgar or wrong, occasionally insulting him and calling him white trash when he disobeyed. He would eventually be kicked out of this home, after which he recalls moving to New York, where he would see the first bit of money coming in from his online career. Importantly, he also recalls being molested as a child, and that he was hypersexual since that moment, which leads into the next portion of his career. Upon turning 18, Hawke would move into adult content, which, if he is to be believed, would begin bringing in ridiculous amounts of money. According to him, he has made millions on OnlyFans, claiming that his most lucrative month brought in north of $170,000.
So grossed in total from September 2020 all the way up until now is 1.8. But my best month that I ever had was, what is this, March 2021, 174,000 in only 1 month.
He would also make frequent mentions to this work on his TikTok, which some would take issue with, considering that this transition came rather abruptly and obviously did not involve any real warning, or the making of a separate account, meaning that minors following his very large account could be exposed to explicit content.
So back in 2020, this person had a large fan base, right? Likely consisted of a lot of children, and still does to this day. Now, what is the issue with that? Well, the fact that they started doing adult content and promoted it on the same exact account without any rebranding on any new account. The same followers from 2020, which are likely children, can see the promotion of that content and maybe look for it now.
It is interesting to note that while he was under fire for allegedly scamming his fans, he would give a drastically different account of his income than what he would say just a few weeks later in an interview.
First, I want to start with the AI generated facts about my income. There was no way in hell I could make anywhere to $1 million a year or more. I'm trying to save money for months and months and months, and I've been selling shit left and right, left and right. I don't even own 80% of the things I used to own about a year ago. I have been getting rid of things. I have been selling taxidermy. I have been selling my belongings. I have been working my ass off.
But we'll get to that. Hawke recounts that he would have moved into doing explicit content whether he went viral on TikTok or not, claiming that it was just something he was drawn to. Despite the controversy, Hawke was clearly able to create quite a lucrative model for profit, and recounts making several extravagant purchases, such as spending $14,000 on a fossil, as well as buying crystals, paying for taxidermy, and according to him, becoming Gucci's most loyal customer.
Yeah, I can definitely admit a lot of financial faults, and I spent way too much money on dead animals. And I know one of the main things people are upset about is that fossil. I had a good chunk of money, my savings, $13,600. I had this idea in my head that I was going to be bougie. I became one of the top purchasers at Gucci.
This spending would result in him needing to use essentially all of his income for bills and animal expenses, claiming to now only make around 7 to 7.5k per month with his adult content. He even claims to have been selling many of his belongings to be able to afford rent. This would, of course, later become a part of the controversy, seeing as Hawke felt the need to create a less than forthcoming GoFundMe and ask for money from his audience, despite claiming to have made such a ridiculous amount just a few years prior. This leads me to wonder whether he is just lying about needing money, or if he is somehow telling the truth, what could have possibly been so expensive that it drained the literal millions he made in such a short time. According to those who have kept track of Roman Hawke for a while, he has a history of being neglectful or allegedly even abusive towards animals. The main example people are pointing to is a post he made 3 years ago about his dachshund puppy, in which he claims that when trying to, quote, pop his butt, he was bitten, and the same happened to his boyfriend. He also ominously claims to be on his last line with the dog. This sparked a lot of criticism as people recounted how this can cause permanent harm for dachshunds and, of course, being generally appalled at the implication that Hawke was in the habit of hitting his dog. It seems that even then people were aware of his spending habits, as they claim that instead of finding expert dog trainers and dog walkers, he prefers to blow his substantial income on taxidermy and fursuits. The fact that years ago people were catching on to the same thing Hawke is in trouble for now is both incredibly pathetic and foreboding. There have been a couple other examples of apparent neglect or overall unawareness, such as when Hawke allegedly left a baby lizard with newspaper pellets, leading to its death, and when another lizard was allegedly eaten by Margo. It's important to note that there's not much evidence for these claims, since most of the concerned material would have been deleted anyway. However, if true, they would definitely establish a pattern of neglect. Finally, considering the central lizard, Margo, Hawke claims that she was at some point unable to lay infertile eggs, leading to a septic infection that required her tail to be removed. Some others have notably claimed that this was instead due to unhealthy conditions, as Hawke had Margo on carpet, which is apparently unsanitary because it is difficult to completely remove bacteria. These examples, while possibly not outright abuse or neglect, paint an interesting light, as many would recount them when speaking about Margo's eventual death. And now we get to the inciting incident. Margo suddenly passed from gastric neuroendocrine carcinomas, or stomach cancer. Now this sparked criticism from some who claimed that it was because she was obese, which could be a risk factor. People would also point to Hawke's past issues with Margo's environment and with his other animals. And then there was the GoFundMe. Roman Hawke created a GoFundMe asking for $4,000, apparently for the cremation and taxidermy of Margo. And just to be clear, it was literally titled, "Celebrate Margo's Life with a Memorial." This alone was enough to spark backlash, with experts in cremation and reptiles coming out and saying the cost was less than 1/10 of what Hawke was asking for.
Margo the bearded dragon. I am an animal cremation specialist as well as a taxidermist, bone harvesting, and pet memorials. So unsurprisingly, I have been asked my opinion on this situation. Y'all are being scammed. Do not donate to that GoFundMe, because there is no world where cremating a bearded dragon is $4,000. The company that I work for, we would charge under $300 for a complete private package for the cremation of a bearded dragon. So I don't know where $4,000 is coming from. And yes, that includes a custom urn. And as a taxidermist, yes, full body skeletal articulation is expensive, especially for a lizard, but $4,000, no, don't donate to that GoFundMe. Plus that lizard was neglected to the point that it died.
And even if the GoFundMe wasn't dishonest in its costs and details, the fact that Hawke even needed money despite having made millions is already suspicious. Some went as far as claiming that he was planning on using the money to buy a new fursuit. Many people began criticizing Hawke, with the combination of claiming the GoFundMe was a scam and that he neglected Margo, which contributed to a significant shortening of her lifespan. And well, it's safe to say that Hawke's response wasn't the most graceful. He would go on to post multiple tirades, including the infamous fursuit crash out.
So, I'm at my wit's fucking end. I'm wearing a suit head because I haven't showered in a few days because I just can't bring myself to even fucking take care of myself right now. Your loved one dies. Something you cared about more than anything, and all you wanted to do was give a restful life as they got older, and they die of cancer. Cancer, something no one caused, something no one could prevent. But it's my fault. I caused cancer? Cancer? Are you fucking kidding me? Cancer? And for all the other fucking people, the same like before, okay, do you not know that the necropsy, autopsy, the payment for the shipping Hawaii overnight across the fucking country, the payment for the services, the payment for the urn, the payment to ship back, all of that fucking adds up. Saying I'm using this 4K to buy a new fursuit, why the fuck? I'm moving. I'm in the middle of moving. I have so much other things to think about than a stupid fucking costume. I'm wearing this because I look like shit. I haven't had a single fucking moment to grieve. I haven't had a single fucking moment to process anything going on. You're using screenshots and shit from 5 years ago when I didn't know proper husbandry, and you're just like, oh, that's still going. Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. All of you deserve to rot. All of you.
I don't think I have to explain why this was not the smartest move when responding to being embroiled in controversy, especially a controversy in which you are specifically being accused of scamming your fans to have more fursuits. Hawke would later say that he regretted this response and that he put his fursuit on because he hadn't showered in a while. Yeah, not really helping your case there. But that wasn't all, as Hawke would make several other responses in which he claimed that he didn't neglect Margo, and essentially just calls his critics brain-dead and demented over and over again.
But once again, I see everything. I see every comment that's made, I see every post that's made about me. I see everything that's said about me. And I have just watched disrespect after harassment after boundaries crossed ever since she has passed. It is not that hard to block me. If you really don't like me that much, it is not that hard to press a single button, and it's not that hard to not go to a website you're not supposed to be on. God gave you a brain for a reason. Use it.
That's demented. You spent this much on a fossil. 4 years ago, when I had the money. You neglected Margo when you're born instead. I work in my house. By myself. In a room for an hour. A day. Not even. You're sending me death threats through GoFundMe, my email, my phone number, my Facebook, my Twitter, my Instagram, and any way y'all can reach me, y'all are fucking demented. Y'all are sick. Hell, there's a lot of other heinous shit I want to say, but I don't give a fuck anymore. The death of my literal daughter, my baby, my everything, warrants death threats for shit I didn't even do. Wow. Wow.
Hawke made an effort to add up every cost he identified as relating to Margo's death, including the autopsy, medical tests, and the cremation, in an attempt to justify the GoFundMe.
That was for necrosis autopsy, that was for testing, that was for services, that was paying for shipping, paying for the shipping back because it has to be overnight.
However, the audience did not want to hear it, considering that the initial presentation was deceptive, and that, by some estimates, the costs still do not add up. Overall, Hawke's responses did little to quell the backlash.
Hey, hypothetically, you've been a naughty girl even. Okay.
And eventually, in perhaps the only smart move he has made in his career, or maybe life, he decided to completely wipe his TikTok account, which is how it remains to this day. Now, I wanted to go over and clarify some of the blatant contradictions Hawke made throughout the course of the drama. Things that are probably false, or at least he definitely lied at least once about. He claims to have made millions on OnlyFans, only to claim later that his income is much lower when he was in trouble for asking for money. He also implies that he was not spending money on frivolous things like taxidermy, when that is literally one of the procedures he aimed to have done to display Margo's bones.
Wanted her cremated, but I also wanted to be able to see her, but also not see her in a way that would freak me out. So no freeze-dry taxidermy, but I want to see you, but I also want your remains.
He emphatically and comically denies having anything to do with Margo's death, repeatedly saying that he cannot cause cancer.
I caused cancer? Cancer? Are you fucking kidding me? Cancer?
However, as many have pointed out, obesity is a risk factor for gastric cancer. And while Hawke claimed that Margo lost weight despite being obese at a young age, many think that she was still overweight and did not have much room to climb or move around. Interestingly, Hawke also addresses this, but only to say that Margo didn't like moving around.
I gave her many opportunities. She would get up maybe about halfway and then just stay halfway. She never wanted to be like all the way up on my shoulder. But she never was a climber.
He claims that Margo doesn't like to climb. You wouldn't know if she likes to climb. It is in their nature that they are climbing animals because they are from the desert.
Hawke claims that nobody is forcing people to donate to a GoFundMe.
No one's forcing you to donate to a GoFundMe. That is based off free will.
Despite the issue being that he lied about the reasons behind it, and his claims about his current financial status are dubious at best. On that note, he also says that he couldn't possibly be neglecting Margo because he works at home for an hour a day.
You neglected Margo and you're born instead.
I work in my house by myself in a room for an hour a day.
This both ignores the criticisms regarding Margo's living environment, as well as maybe unintentionally reveals that instead of scamming his fans, he should probably just work more with his extra time so he can pay for things himself.
You know, if you really need money that bad, why don't you get a job?
Hawke goes on to claim multiple times that Margo was his first real responsibility. He got her at 16, and he was just a kid trying to raise his quote-unquote daughter. However, this is definitely not what should be expected of any animal owner, but especially not someone who makes a living, at least in part, off of being an animal expert. Similarly to speculation on where all of his money went, if incompetence is the best case scenario, I'd argue that definitely still warrants criticism. Following a period of radio silence, Roman Hawke would actually make an appearance in an interview on Papa Gut's channel. Papa Gut is a commentary YouTuber and TikToker, as well as one of only a few YouTubers who made a video about the Margo situation. Interestingly, Papa Gut was extremely critical of Hawke in his first video on the situation, which was titled "Roman Hawke Weaponizes Margo the Lizard's Death to Beg for an Egregious Amount of Money." He also didn't hold back within the video.
You sat here and you begged for $4,000, which is like 4 times the cost of what you actually want to do to your dead lizard.
I work in my house in a room for an hour a day.
Oh, it's so hard to live. I don't have the money. You work an hour a day. What the fuck is that?
It's a fursuit.
1, 2, 3. I think this is a 4th. How many fursuits do you have?
Now, despite this harsh criticism, the tone of the interview was remarkably amicable, with much of the hour and 18 minutes consisting of stories from Hawke's life. They talk about his upbringing, his rise in success, and finally the situation surrounding and Hawke's response to Margo's death. They heavily reference Hawke's youth, implying multiple times that he did the best he could and that Margo's death was not his fault.
You know, after everything, you know, I heard everything and I sat down, especially what you're saying now. It sounds like you got this lizard, you got Margo when you were very young, 16. Mm-hmm. You were, for the most part, left to kind of raise it yourself. Your grandparents probably looked at it as like, hey, maybe this will be good for your responsibility. Mm-hmm. And there probably, definitely could have been more ideal circumstances, but it's one of those things where you probably did the best that you could do as a child raising a lizard.
Hawke also goes back to claiming that he made millions on OnlyFans and brushes off his new apparent dire financial situation, explaining it away as taxes, insurance, and a few dumb purchases.
Of course, you know, all the money I've made in total, and I've listed off all the things, you know, that I have paid for, you know, taxes, all the insurance stuff. Like, there's so many factors.
Finally, Hawke reiterates the list of costs the GoFundMe was for, despite its initial presentation having none of these things included. They barely touch at all on certain factors that could have influenced Margo's diagnosis, why Hawke lied on the GoFundMe, Hawke's past controversies involving his other animals, and why he should be forgiven for his incompetence when he should be a figure of authority. However, it is remarkable how much Hawke pulled himself together and appeared to be a reasonable person, even though it appeared that he had free reign in the interview to touch on whatever he wanted and in however much detail he wanted. Coming away from this interview, many of Papa Gut's viewers seem to have really enjoyed how he was so respectful and didn't cut off or try to own Hawke throughout the conversation. This may be true, but there needs to be some sort of balance to ensure that your interviewee, who, let's not forget, is someone Papa Gut was ruthlessly criticizing just a week prior, isn't able to say whatever they want without being challenged.
And trying to profit off of my daughter's death.
Don't sit here and call your daughter, because I think that's gross. I don't even think that you believe that. Margo is your Well, I mean, you've mentioned that Margo was your daughter, which is interesting to me. You know, at first I was like, that feels a little disrespectful, but then I have like, my mother thinks that her fucking dogs are her children, so you know, I get it.
In my opinion, Hawke went completely unchecked, with the closest thing to pushback in the entire hour and 18 minutes being when he implied that Margo's cancer was completely genetic and couldn't have been prevented, and Papa Gut acknowledged that there were some environmental factors that could make it more likely, which could either be alluding to Margo's obesity or the admittedly less than ideal conditions she was living in, which they discussed earlier. However, while he does acknowledge this, he says it in a way that implies Hawke is not at fault, because he was so young and in an uncertain situation in life.
I just wish more people understood that this was going to happen inevitably, and there was nothing to prevent it unless I had brought her in like a month prior.
People, again, they get very exaggerated in their frustration. You know, it's possible that there were environmental aspects to it, but again, you were very young when you got her, and a lot of it was learning, and it's like sometimes that's just unfortunately how it goes.
He doesn't mention any concerns about the tail infection, barely touches on the GoFundMe deception, barely if at all pushes back on the obesity and living conditions of the lizard, and doesn't pry about the very elaborate grieving process being paid for by unknowing fans, or even why Hawke needs fans to pay for it despite claiming to have made millions on OnlyFans and having millions of followers. He does, however, spend the majority of the interview talking about Hawke's life experiences and asks some very interesting questions, such as if Hawke likes to present as feminine in his adult content.
I have I guess a little bit of a personal question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but I am just like genuinely curious.
Okay.
When you do content, are you presenting more femininely usually?
And if he was relieved when Margo died because she was associated with the video that made him viral.
Was there any level of relief almost when Margo passed, since it was so heavily associated with such a, we'll say, emotionally heavy time for you?
This is all due to an apparent effort to not have a gotcha moment where he's trying not to be performative or argumentative.
I tried to see what people said when I made that video of like, oh, I'd like to talk to you, but not really in this like big argumentative, performative, like, you know, I got feedback of people were like, oh, you know, they killed their this and they did this. And I was like, okay, let me see that.
Which he definitely seems to have accomplished, opting instead for a conversation that is not very productive, especially considering how harsh he himself was criticizing Hawke before. This doesn't seem like a conversation I would have with somebody I accused of exploiting a pet's death to ask for an egregious amount of money just a week ago. And if certain issues are not pushed by the interviewer, then the person in controversy is obviously not going to touch on it themselves. The takeaway from some other viewers seems to be that Hawke is just incredibly stupid and incompetent, and blew all of his money, failed to take care of his pet, and made some terrible responses to criticism. And this seems to be probably the most optimistic yet realistic way of looking at it. It is definitely a possibility, but even this level of stupidity still rings malicious, as Hawke is positioning himself as someone who is in need and could not have done anything more to give Margo a happy life. I do wish that Papa Gut had provided some more resistance to Hawke's claims. I think he's trying to be reasonable and kind, but it resulted in him trying too hard to be understanding and neglecting to have a real conversation. This is an interesting situation in which it seems that everyone on TikTok has agreed unanimously that Hawke is completely guilty, mistreats his pets, and scammed his fans, while barely any notable videos have been made about him on YouTube, with one of the harshest critics seeming to have done a complete 180 just a week later. I think the most generous conclusion one could come to is just that Roman Hawke should not have an online presence, and should never have gone viral in the first place. And as he has come to show throughout his controversy, he cannot respond to criticism in the slightest, and never had any level of expertise in reptiles or finances. I don't know if he was malicious in the framing of his GoFundMe, and clearly was not there to witness the life and death of Margo the lizard, but I do know that I wish someone more researched on the drama, or at least more willing to confront Hawke when he glossed over important details, had done the interview. At the very least though, I hope Hawke stays off the internet, is able to get a real job.
No more saying cuss words. It is not good.
And stops owning and or neglecting pets, as that would probably be better for all of the unwitting fans and bearded dragons out there, as well as Hawke himself. This was a unique situation, though it has a pretty frustrating ending, with answers left up in the air and Hawke not really receiving any punishment for his deception and possible neglecting of his pets. Whether it was intentional or not, he did put up a disingenuous fundraiser, and in some ways self-admittedly had Margo in less than ideal conditions. We don't even know if he needed the money, and if that was the case, how he could have possibly blown through his ridiculous profits. Hopefully answers will come to light in the future. But for me, I am done with reptile talk furry drama, which is not really my wheelhouse. Thank you all for watching the video, and make sure to leave a like if you liked it, leave a dislike if you disliked it, and leave a comment telling me what you want to see next. Sorry about my voice in this video, I'm a little sick. Also, subscribe. Alright, see ya.